The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What is happening? Benton here. It is my honor and privilege and perhaps duty to address you fine folks this morning. Hope everybody's doing well. Trust everyone is doing well. Um, this is the longest we've gone. This is the longest the royal we's gone without the zero turning to a one. This is interesting. Although I typically don't just stare at the zero. I'm transfixed within this surrealistic, unreal waking dream. Is that the turn off? Do I need to change the stream title? Hey, there we go. Shout out to the chat. Shout out to Joe Moore, who's kind enough to leave peace and blessings, um, or to offer peace and blessings, if that's the correct term. Shout out to Replay Crew. Most of the streams getting over 100 views, and they changed the way that they calculate the views. So, yeah, pretty content with that. Not that it matters within a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. And I must remind myself of something I've told other folks. This world, America, life, as vacuous, delusory, adversarial, and as many, and as transactional as all of this is, and certainly as surrealistic and unreal and akin to a waking dream. Um, it's not something that's being done to me necessarily. Uh, I'm not a victim of this. What I am, can never be a victim of this place at that level that I'm speaking. Um, and then this constant, it's like a daily, I don't even want to say reframing. It's seems like there's a pattern repeating where in the morning times, whether it's this live stream or walking around with my thoughts, it seems like I wake up to varying degrees identified again with the validity of an invalid realm. Okay, and what I mean by that is you know man and his search for meaning type shit. Um, and it's interesting, the strength of the delusion I've spoken about, and I've talked about, the inversion. The many think of this as a realm of inversion, and within the inversion, um, so much time, right? So many new moments have occurred, since 1975 to now for me that, it's like a habit to fall into that, strong identification with this realm. And for me, a lot of it ends up being, well, no, I shouldn't say a lot, but at times it's news reading the news. I find difficulty um, when there's actually a lot of happenings in the news. I find difficulty in avoiding it. And then as my already, fairly high level meditative abilities increase even further, my perception is that, so I'm reading these news articles and, but also observing my, emotional state, my internal states, stress, tensions, everything that's going on. and even YouTube videos, a lot of times I'll be listening to something and then out of nowhere, is like disturbing content, or just, maybe somebody has some anger in their voice. And I'm going to tie this into some religious, spiritual, and Christian ideas if I'm able to also, because I did not used to be this way, meditatively. I had probably 75 to 80% of the awareness that I have now. Um, but I wasn't necessarily viewing that as a bad thing, right? My interest in reading the news article was much more important in the past than whatever my body was doing, my mind, body, and spirit, whatever those reactions were. Um, and, I'm really disciplining myself in a lot of ways, to not take in certain types of content. And I do believe, and I say believe because I'm not 100% certain, but it seems to me that, this has been what has come along with my recent, within the last 6 months, the true knowledge of self slash self realization, baptism in the Holy Spirit, continuous renewing. And not all of some of this occurred before the last 6 months. It's mostly been the unlocking of the achievement within the air quotes game of, true knowledge of self or self realization, a bell that cannot be unrung. Um, and this idea of the person's heart being transformed, via you know cliched, the cliched ways that Christians speak about, being saved or finding Jesus. And I don't think that way. I don't respond that way. I do my best not to speak in those terms. It is cringe, certainly. Church itself is cringe. Let's face the reality. Well, we don't have to. The royal we will face the reality. You folks do whatever you like. I'm not here to authorize, right? I'm not here to authorize or anything of that nature. Back to zero. Wow, fascinating. Back to one. Huh. Maybe I should not look at the screen at all. And you know, it seems like my sensitivities and at the level of the heart, again, doing my best to be properly identified within myself with my own true nature, which is one with, super intelligent love creation, alpha omega, right? um the source of all, right? Life itself, in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of death and destruction, right? No life emanates from this place. You know, what I am, has always, it's just, again, time and space doesn't apply. Okay. And now Benton, the consciousness, the performance, the performer, the persona, the personality, the characteristics, the psychology, right? The so-called ego, the id, the subconscious, the conscious, is here speaking, right? And not doing a very interesting job of it, apparently. Um, which is okay, I suppose. I'm not entitled to anyone's time or attention, certainly. Um, it's more of, I guess I'm surprised by it. But what I mean about the heart is, and I certainly recognize that, some may interpret all of this love talk as like a, what do they call this? Like soft guy era, and a, a, just like a softening, or, the idea that, a man's testosterone declines with age. I'll be 50 next month. Well, that's a myth, folks. Number one, that's an absolute myth. And the thing is, probably because of, my own genetics and bloodline, if that's a thing, whatever all this is, and then how harshly I was socialized within a cultural context in, what has historically in the United States post Civil War, at least, maybe even before that, I've come from an area of the country where, my research indicates in the past, like just fighting, physically fighting was more or less a pastime or a hobby or like a sport. And there are accounts, in the area in which I'm from of more or less some of these towns having just like a continuous brawl in the streets, right? Like people just brawling in the streets all day. And I'm sure some of that's exaggerated for effect. And the point I'm trying to make here is, that's what I've come from, but I caught the first part, and probably my father actually, was the first Benton, probably, or one of the first Bentons who didn't just like have to necessarily physically mix it up. Although I suspect by the time, my grandfather, and then, who, my dad's dad, and by the time my grandfather was raising his kids, I think because of how mean and big and just powerful and terrifying and intimidating these fellas were, you know, I know my uncles, at least the first two, the firstborn, were known as bullies and beating people up and all of this. But there's no fighting, right? No physical fighting. I went to school and there was fist fights, right? Junior high and high school, there's fist fights, sometimes in the school building. Now to some people they're like, yeah, this is normal. Well, I never had to fight anybody. Some of that probably, psychologically understanding, um, how to operate psychologically and strategically, to outmaneuver and not to put myself into a position, to have a fight. I famously mentioned that there was by the time I was a senior, actually a junior in high school, there was, and it doesn't really matter that he's black, but a black kid at my school who was really good at fighting and was just went on this succession of just like beating up a lot of the tough white guys, I guess, and but that mutually wanted to fight. And I guess in spite of my slight stature, at some point maybe I got viewed as a tough guy. It was like he's ran out of people to conquer. So at one day it was just announced that Benton's on the list, right? And it's going down after school or whatever. And I liked we didn't have any beef. This is just the craziness of youth, I suppose. And well, I had a car and I went to work. And I don't know how well this was known, but I had a job. So I don't know, like the last two periods of school, I was just gone. I left the campus and went to my job. And so, based on the idea that maybe this was known, maybe this guy's going to be waiting for me at my car or whatever, I just like left a period early, and then came back to school the next day, and just everything was completely normal. Whereas a lot of guys, I think, would just assume, oh, well, now I have to. It's like, no, I don't have to fight anybody. No, absolutely not. It's they call it mutual combat for a reason. It's like, no, I don't have to fight this guy. And it's like, well, what about your reputation? What about this? What about that? Some of that is just, being able to stand on my own too. And that's why I mention this with respect to love and creation and a potential softening and talking about my heart changing and all of these things potentially is I'm pretty sure I'm never going to lose that edge. My father still seems to have it and he's 70, right? I'm pretty sure, right, that I'm never going to lose, whatever that is. I think every actual man, as long as his physicality and his hormones are there, I think every man has that within them, whatever that is. It's probably there, biologically, again, within delusion. But I was socialized in the culture of my family, the culture of, the local area, hyper masculinized culture that really fed on anger. Sadly, I hate to think about it that way. Really, that was, in some ways, that was what propelled society at the time, seemingly, was anger and rage. And I myself, made use of anger as fuel for decades. And so that's really what I'm talking about, is now what's happening. And this has been very interesting to get into specifics, this idea of the transformed heart, right? Just as an idea or a concept, that what seems to happen now when something occurs that in the past would have caused me anger, um, that I'm aware of it, but then the heart chakra, and again, if people aren't into the chakra system, that's fine. Like I absolutely, it exists within Benton's sphere of influence. I have no idea what's going on. Ultimately, I can't be sure of much of anything outside of my own sphere of influence. So I'm only talking about Benton's chakra system, right? And what's interesting is the heart chakra then starts to activate or is becomes activated, and I actually feel love instead of anger. And this is probably something I've talked about before, which is the human heart is unable to experience love and fear simultaneously. And we can get into, it's not my wheelhouse, but is anger like a form of fear or whatever? Well, rooted in fear, perhaps. Again, not my expertise to speak on that. And that's been very interesting. Or just sitting in the park for an hour to an hour and a half, getting sun onto a particular part of my body while for health reasons, while in a political environment where, not because I'm white, right? And actually, I don't even identify as white. I don't, not fully. I don't know if you folks know this, but uh, there's signs that certainly I'm Caucasian genetically in certain ways, but there's also some other signs that there's other things happening with Benton. But I don't want to get into that right now. But there's been some daily. There's animosity directed towards me based on what's happening politically with ICE and just all of the government, and just you know I was walking down the sidewalk yesterday, and some people, homeless people, who were on their way to a homeless, to get a meal at a homeless place, a lunch, um, probably drunk, you don't know, but not native English speakers. And I crossed to the others. I don't know if this is why, but a lot of these sidewalks are so narrow, and I'm so deep in thought that, and with the undiagnosed fake autism, when I'm up in those, we say deep thinking, but my perception of it is actually high up, almost above me, and that's, my consciousness is like high up above, and it's and I'm usually listening to something as well, and then so I'm adrift in that rich inner landscape of the beautiful mind, right? And so sort of the autopilot is, oh, there's three people. I can see that where we are about to intersect is very narrow. And for what I've got going on, it's way better to just cross the road to the other sidewalk and proceed. And I don't know if that was, maybe they thought I was just avoiding them and did not like them because they're a different race. And one of them just yelled out Trump real loud and seemed to be addressing me. It was because kind of everybody turned to look at me, and I just kind of looked over like, huh. And which is funny, because if he had tried to say one or more sentences, I wouldn't have had any idea what he said. But the singular word Trump managed to trump my noise canceling earbuds. Although actually, I think my cheaper pair is not noise canceling. But yeah, managed to trump. Um, it got through the earbuds, and so I'm not in physical danger necessarily, although everybody is all the time on some level. Um, and I certainly know how to handle myself, and with the true knowledge of self, when properly identified, I'm unable to. What I am lacks the ability to fear in the first place, or to even experience fear. Well, only within a delusion, I should say, um, more correctly, from the perspective in which I'm speaking. And see, this sort of thing happens every single day to me here. And then I was thinking this morning about, well, I could have stayed in Fort Smith or whatever, and which I might have done in Arkansas if I had access to my streamer equipment. I might have spent the money to spend 2 to 3 months there and just do live streams. Um, but I'm probably would have ended up back here anyway. So what's the difference? And now we get back to the stream title, the surrealistic, unreal, waking dream. When I think about the United States, I've been effectively everywhere. there's only a couple of places that I haven't really checked out thoroughly. Well, there's a few, but it's the more populated an area is in the States, there's a greater chance I've checked it out and spent a decent amount of time there. And then when you coupled with the truck driving also, because remember, most of what I'm speaking on had nothing to do with truck driving, and then add the truck driving on top of it. And I know intellectually there's just nowhere to go, right? And I myself years ago was in this mind space, this headspace of, it can be convenient to whatever struggles or problems or challenges the individual is facing to sort of say, well, that's because of the environment. Well, yeah, the environment is part of the circumstances. And I myself in the past suffered from this, and I observed this in my father and many other people, where it's the mistaken notion that the problems are caused by the present circumstances. So the solution to the problems is to resolve the present circumstances, and then everything will be fine, except each set of circumstances contains its own challenges and problems. Meaning if I change the circumstance of where I'm physically located, that doesn't eliminate challenges and hardships and struggles, right? Or things that are inconvenient. It changes the circumstances. Now it's different inconveniences, different problems, right? Um, I would rather be here in Los Angeles persecuted every day to a certain extent than to be in the middle part of the country where from my perspective, way too many of the folks are ignorant and are desirous of mistreating human beings based on their own individual, this is my opinion, their own individual struggles and challenges. The people who are doing that, it's hatred, really. I mean, it is hatred. So this is what happens. So now so I've become a symbol in some ways, and probably always have been, of, I'm assuming that the brown people are feeling hated on, right? And they don't like it. And probably they're what is the default emotional state of the average American anyway? Like, we're already talking about stressed out. We're already talking about, depression, anxiety, psychological woes, emotional problems. And then add, all of this craziness on top of it. And with all of these raids, and just effectively everyone having a device uh, connected to the internet that's pushing ideas at them, and then simultaneously what's happened in Los Angeles and probably other big cities is there's just all this notion of working together as a community, so that it's now everybody's on the lookout for ICE. Here's the problem is, I'm tested in the 99th percentile by the government. So number one, I promise you there's not a single street level government agent who's tested in the 99th. Like, it just doesn't exist. And uh, so some of my undiagnosed fake autism, the fact that I can, or probably not now, but that as a younger person, I was tested in the 99th percentile by the government, that's true fact, is that, you know, I'm so detail oriented and sort of military minded, right? My mind is my weapon. I'm fucking squared away for the most part, but never served in the military, or never would work for the government, for the feds. Fuck the feds. However, so, and this is how confused society has become, because I'm not necessarily coming across as an overtly homeless person, but maybe they don't care. Maybe the rage and the hatred they're feeling, maybe that's maybe that's uh, just everything's reached such a boiling point, and I should be, a little more, seeing it from these people's perspective. Once someone's in a highly emotionalized state, that they've, best of times the ability to access logic is very limited. And then once the person's in a highly charged emotional state, they don't have the capacity to spot ice. Meaning, if they think it's me walking around with a certain type of, with a short haircut, squared away with a certain, type of walking and moving and marching to some extent. Lest we forget, I walked 10 miles a day every single day with 35 pounds on my back for about 6 straight years, and never served in the military. So, all of these things. But when a person is thinking for themselves, it should be quickly, well, wait a minute, why is there only one of him? Right. So I understand where it's initially, and also there's plenty of non-white ICE agents, right? And, you know, from what I understand on these raids, they have their faces covered or whatever. But and it kind of proves one of my, my idea that the general public has stopped processing data. And, I realized this pretty early on in the pandemic, working as a long haul trucker and, at times, so in various parts of the country, at times having conversations with people, or at least just engaging someone in a brief back and forth and sort of observing their reactions and their responses. And it just struck me one day. I said, oh, these people are no longer processing data. Their stimulus is happening and they are responding. The thought process is not there anymore. And so on the one hand, society promotes these ideas around, you know, the commie side of it, that's opposed to the present power structure because it wants to become the power structure. I think that's what's lost in all this is, the idea of a communist revolution, which if that were to occur, it would be because that's what the system decided suited the system for that period of time. But the point I'm making is the commies have no desire to help anybody. It's not a love. So back to the softening of the heart. It's not out of love and wanting better things for society. It's out of a negative motivation of a hatred and a disdain, right, for the present power structure. And then, okay, well, it's the idea of something must be done, right? Oh, well, you can't just do nothing. And now I start to hear, and this is where ideology and the idea of people not processing data. So now I have MAGA types and right wing types that I've heard, you know, online and in real life, who will just parrot the idea, well, you can't just do nothing. That's an idea straight out of the lefty playbook, Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. So what's happened in my view is that the MAGA and the right wing, they've mixed it up. And again, the smartphone, the internet, social media, and the smartphone is to blame for a lot of this. Before the internet, the smartphone, and the social media, these groups of people were not interacting much at all, right? And they weren't really, so the right wing types simply were not exposed to the tactics and ideas of the left. Now they have been, and they are becoming the left wing. It's just that what is communism operates by, there's always that bleeding edge of, how good of a commie can the person be? How good of an anti-racist can they be? How good of an anti-this can they be? And that's always progressing and moving. So what will happen is, as the lefties become even more lefty, that distance between, but you have the right wing following behind at a great distance, but moving toward the left. The right wing isn't moving towards the right. It's moving towards the left. But the thing is, the left is also moving to the left. So that distance is not closing, if that makes sense. But the right wing, one of the major aspects of the so-called right wing is ignorance. They don't want anything to do. They're scared of ideas, right? They're scared to interface with these ideas, except when the ideas are packaged and sent to them via push notification, and when their peer groups begin to ape and mimic, even a notion of, oh, well, there's Benton whining and complaining about a problem. Well, let's just ask him what his solution is, and that'll shut him up. Again, that's straight out of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. And we saw it with Obama in the town halls when he would go, well, what's your solution? because somebody would stand up in the crowd and speak this long-winded just description of problems, especially right after the global financial crisis, which never ended. It's still 08, 09. But see, I remember all of this. I'm one of the few with an actual memory. And so Obama would stand there, just totally confident and actively listening, and then he would sort of thank the person and reinforce them, and make them feel good, as a politician is wont to do. And then, well, what's your solution, right? And so now the right wing is adopting a lot of those tactics without understanding where they've originated, because they've observed them. And then it becomes like an all is fair in love and war type thing, which I don't even like that expression. Why am I using that expression? So back to Benton being persecuted in the streets of Los Angeles. And it's really just more bizarre than anything else. What happens is, if I'm walking down the sidewalk, people are so on edge and so observant. Like what happened yesterday, uh, car alarms start going off. Like, people disarm and rearm their car alarm, right, to make it make a noise, right? I'm walking down the street and people start beeping their horns, but it's not traffic related, right? This is because there's signs everywhere. People put up, they post signs. Here's what to do if you see ice, right? And then they're all talking about it on social media, presumably. And who is it that puts forth these ideas? It's the left wing. It's the communistas, right? It's the communists. Um, all of this fight the state, fight the power type stuff. And but the result of it is they don't stop ICE. Most of them go to jobs and actually fund ICE. Uh, at this time, I'm not paying for ICE. Maybe I never will. Again, that's yet to be determined. Um, but here's Benton being persecuted, and I understand it's part of it is the realm. Every day. Here's where we get to the surrealistic waking dream. Unreality. And more I'm expecting it, but because I'm so in my I'm so deep in thought, it sneaks up on me. But and again, not a targeted individual, but I understand what those people mean. At some point, I'm going to leave this car, this Nissan Versa, and a lot of it with me is physical proximity and timing. And what's going to happen is several occurrences will occur in a row that in the past would have made me angry. I would have allowed to trigger me, right? Make me angry, frustrate me, stymie me, right? And which is the undiagnosed fake autism talking. And I've largely been delivered from that, thankfully. Just the forcefulness in my discourse, picking up its forcefulness is I'm so aware, most moments of my own internal space. Now I'm feeling maybe a little bit of that repressed, forcefulness or anger, whatever little bit is left is seeking its escape, right? Because I'm going back to identifying with what I know myself to be. So very temporarily, that's what just happened. Is temporarily I identified with it. Really, it's to identify or validate anything other than my own essence or nature. So anger is not my essence or nature. Forcefulness is not my essence or nature. So even speaking that way so briefly, I could feel the change within myself. And that's my reminder. And this is the practice, or one of the practices. That's my reminder to remind myself to remember, right? To remember what I am and to behave accordingly. Because to not, once I remember what I am, to refuse to act on that and identify with that and honor that is to curse what my essence represents, because my essence represents blessing. Right. Now, what I wanted to talk about earlier is this idea that the cynical or the people who are skeptical will then view me based on what I'm saying, and then they will create in their own mind expectations for, well, how would a person behave who's properly identified and is talking about their heart being transformed and is talking about love and creation all the time. Because the performance, Benton's performance, there will be many, many times when the person can critique the performance and say, aha, well, here's a way in which he's seemingly not living up to what he's putting forward. Is he practicing what he preaches? And what I would say is, as long as I know that I am, that Benton is doing those things within Benton's sphere of energy. Now I'm trying not to use the I am, the capital I am, right, as much, to only, again, trying, let's not curse blessing here. So this idea that I've been talking about recently, that there's no meaning, how can there possibly be meaning outside of my own sphere of influence or energy sphere, when I am 100% certain at the level of true knowledge of self of the nature of this place as uh, vacuous, delusory, meaning delusion, adversarial, meaning this place has set up to make an enemy of what I am. The capital I space capital A capital M. This world exists in opposition to what that is, what that represents. So, what possible meaning, knowing what I am, is there to be found outside of my sphere of influence within a realm of delusion? Now I'm subscribing to the idea that there's no meaning to be found other than what I'm able to observe. I can observe the external environment, but then I bring that into my internal space. And if I create meaning out of that, that's internal meaning. See? So I'm going to be working with these ideas. So part of me being so deep in thought when I crossed the street to continue to be deep in thought, and then the guy yelled Trump at me, this is what's going on as I'm walking around. I'll be thinking about, well, is that actually correct? This idea of no external meaning. And what will happen is, over enough time, I will know with 100% certainty whether that's a valid idea or an invalid idea. Back to the right wing folks, they're so scared of ideas, they believe that an idea can be catching, which it can, really, if you think about it, because if their peer group catches the cold of, if they catch a cold or a flu of leftism, well, subconsciously, these individuals must understand that they're going to conform. These are order followers who are going to conform to what's expected of them, no matter what. So maybe they should. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for them. Maybe they should be scared of ideas. But knowledge, you can't ever tell me ignorance is bliss, because I'll just counter with, well, then knowledge can't be power. Because now we've created an equation in which to be in a state of nirvana would be to be ignorant. Basically, that's what it would create an equation where that would, the results of that would be, to be totally ignorant would be to be completely satisfied and happy, which is that, the realm is doing that. The realm is in the process of accomplishing that. Freedom is slavery, right? From 1984. Well, I now see that being born into America in 1975, that has been true my entire life in America. My whole life in America has been told that not only am I free, I'm more free than any human in all of human history, solely based on when and where I was born. Now, they don't frame it that way, but that is the message. I didn't do anything other than exit my mother's womb. And now I'm just, because I'm an awesome America and it's Team America, world police. Well, now I'm just as free as anybody could ever be. Meanwhile, I was born into a system of psychological slavery, right? There's the freedom of slavery aspect from 1984. And then ignorance is strength, I think, is the one from 1984. So when we talk about ignorance is bliss, that's, and then there's notions of knowledge is power. Well, ignorance is strength is getting pretty close to what I've asserted here, right? And I forget I always forget the third one for some reason. Who cares? What's the difference? Shout out to the chat. I am not reading comments in case anybody's unclear about that. So in my own practices, I'm fairly close to completely transcending the limitation of word of mouth, common sense, and conventional wisdom, whereby all of my interactions, in the physical, again, not even, in a delusion, right? Within this delusion, the idea that there even is physical space. And when I'm interacting with these other beings, anything that's not copacetic, right? And this happened to me yesterday. I don't know if I'll tell this story or not, but so let's say I am having a brief interaction with another human. As long as my communication is copacetic, then everything's fine. But the moment the content of not the way I'm saying it, not the audience for the idea, the way I'm framing the ideas, right? The moment it's not copacetic, and I understand psychology enough to know, I understand the motivation of the person I'm speaking with. Well, now it's their response 100% of the time is an attack designed to get me to internalize notions that are only external, right? That don't even exist, period, right? But only exist in a delusion outside of my sphere of influence, right? And it's an attack designed to get, oh, hey, buddy, you better go back to, I don't know what you're on about here, but let me remind you to internalize, you know, because remember, it's free America, things are wonderful, everything's perfect. And that is part of the cognitive dissonance, or a lot of the ideas from Orwell's 1984. People really operate based on that notion that no matter what happens, everything's fucking hunky-dory. That's a layer of what's happening psychologically, because there's other layers of, oh my goodness, it's the economy's about to crash, and society's breaking down, and the SHTF is gonna, it's gonna hit the fan, and all of this. It's both things simultaneously, right? But let's say I just happen to mention I don't go to doctors. Well, now I must be attacked to get me back in line, which is some version of, well, you're not a doctor. So in this case, right? But what I said before that, so the person's like, why don't you go to doctors? And, I have an answer. It's a bit of an error perhaps to even go along with their questioning in this case. But since I had an answer, it's like, yeah, glad you asked, because, and this is the part of me that I must kill, right? This is a part of Benton that must die, is this just innate desire to want to be helpful and to want to be seen as knowledgeable, and to be able to answer people's questions, as if, because with my undiagnosed fake autism, for some reason, I think we're just having an intellectual conversation. Like, this person actually is genuinely interested in why I don't go to doctors, right? Of course, I do when I break my foot, but we didn't get to that part of the conversation. But I had already said, and this is also how we know people aren't processing data. I said, because I've never met a person who had a chronic illness. And remember, I'm saying it this way, like, by the time I get to chronic illness, I've already exceeded the attention span of the listener, right? So I don't even know if they're fully hearing what I'm saying in the first place. But I'm able to say it. I've never met a person who had a chronic illness and went through the medical system and had anything good to say about it. And the response was, well, you're not a doctor, so, more or less, I'm not interested in what you have to say about it. But in a polite, like, in a way that was not offensive. And I do appreciate about California culture, and this person was an LA native, being able to convey these ideas in a way that would be inoffensive, would be viewed as inoffensive. But see, logically that doesn't work, because my argument has nothing to do with my ability to assess either my condition or the overall health of the medical system. I've collected a series of anecdotes through my own living of my life and observing, externalities, right? I've never met anybody that had anything good to say whatsoever about the medical establishment, because if they've gone through the medical establishment because of a chronic life-threatening illness, right? Which is certainly what I had 4 years ago or whatever this was. So he just doubled. So now it's a doubling down. He's now his thing is, well, you're not qualified to judge he's more or less implying that I'm not qualified. But then, and again, remember in the past, probably this would have angered me. I would have allowed this to anger me. In the moment, I'm just as loving and just as calm, cool, and collected. It's amazing. Again, the heart being changed and transformed, apparently. Yeah, it's wonderful. No stress, no tension in those moments. Just big old goofy grin on my face. But so I repeat myself. I'm like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. However, and so I repeated my point, and then he was happy to leave it there, thankfully. But it's negating what I'm asserting, but doing it with ideas that have no basis in reality, right? But then, with me, even the lesser evolved Bentons of the past, I was never that strongly identified with this realm as far as, oh, the medical establishment. It's awesome. It's wonderful. Now, part of what he might have been trying to imply was recognizing that I'm from a different part of the country and that the medical system in California is fucking way better than whatever's going on in Arkansas, right? Or wherever my accent is from. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get that deep into the conversation. And since I'm not that sharp in the moment necessarily, a lot of this I don't figure out until later on down the road. The gift of hindsight, right? So he probably had a valid point there. But ultimately I left it at, well, I'm, as far as I can tell, I'm mostly healed, and so everything's fine, basically. But it's very interesting, seeing how people respond to these things. So I recognize his motivation is actually to avoid, casting aspersions on the medical establishment, and that's that layer of it's America, we're free, there's opportunity, the doctor loves you and has your best interest at heart, right? Which, yeah, I understand the medical system is more skilled and less likely to fuck up, right, in California. I understand that. However, uh, the doctor in California is working for a corporation, and if I go through the medical system, it's at the levels of medical coding and billing, right? So the fact that the doctor may have some humanity is not relevant because the doctor's in a corporate structure, and the doctor must do what the corporation tells him to do, or he's out on his ass and he's replaced, or she, right? So the humanity of the doctor is neither here nor there. Okay. And the thing is, I refuse to internalize it. I just simply will not internalize these notions as if it's somehow, am I obligated to go to a doctor because I had a chronic illness? It's almost like this is what one must do. One must go and do these things. Like, why? Why must I? The body heal. Doctors don't heal the body. The body heals itself. The medical system doesn't heal the body. That's just the simple fact of the matter. The body heals itself given the right conditions. That's just what happens. You know. Um, and I was able to, facilitate as much of that healing as possible outside of the medical system, in part because I'm avoiding all of what medical coding and billing would force me to do. Mm. These tests, these meds, we're practicing medicine. So yeah, that cocktail of pills didn't work. Well, it did work. 15% of his liver function is temporarily gone, right? It's like this, maybe there's an oral medication I might be interested in taking for this. I'm trying to avoid specifics because it grosses everybody out. But either way, but when you read up on the oral medications that are considered effective, the reason why these medications can't be over the counter is because the person who takes the medication needs to be under a doctor's care, but not because of the condition that the medicine is for, because of the condition that the medicine causes, because the person loses like 20% of their liver function while they're on the medication. Right. So we need a doctor there to do the blood work and to look for signs of, well, wait a minute. this is affecting his liver too much and we must take him off of it. And that's based on medical coding and billing, and it's based on insurance and liability, right? The corporation has no concern for the state of my liver. The corporation is concerned about its liabilities and its insurance costs. And it's also interested while making maximum profits via medical coding and billing. Does that sound like freedom to anybody? Also, does that sound like freedom? Under freedom, why would under actual freedom, why would uh, trained experts in assisting the healing of Benton's physical body, why would that be involved with money? Right. That already shows you that this place that hates you. If you are what I am, in my opinion, that one aspect proves that this place hates you, especially America. America especially hates you. And not you, the listener, I should say. The royal we. It hates the royal we. It hates the royal us. Okay. And it proves it. Because if the realm loved the royal us, why would it ever even consider for one moment connecting assisted healing by experts to money and transactions and medical coding and billing and insurance and liability? Why would that ever happen? And I understand the mind of the listener will immediately go to, well, how are you going to do this? And how are you going to do that? Listen, folks, the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible to highest levels of vibrational frequency, a quickening spirit, is absolutely capable of that. What are you talking about? Now, do I expect these lovers of death, the people so strongly identified with this realm, that they will attack me, right? And to get me to internalize notions that are not in my best interest, to go along with the status quo so that they can go back to not thinking about these things in these terms, right? Well, fuck them. That's bullshit. Okay. But furthermore, I'm expected to behave in society as if society does anything whatsoever to, uh, via for-profit corporations to actually treat someone with a medical condition with love and actual care. That simply doesn't happen. Now, I understand people go and see their doctor and they may have a regard for their doctor and they may leave their doctor's office with a positive feeling. Guess what? I went to a town hall with one of my elected officials in Arkansas after the bailouts when I had all this knowledge and I was breaking his balls, right? And who was this? Not Mike Huckabee. This other guy. I can't remember his name right. Mike somebody. He was one of these so-called blue dog Democrats or whatever. And which is, just they have to come up with some different form of Democrat for a Democrat to get elected in Arkansas, right? And or Red Dog, I don't remember what it was, but it was something like that. Or maybe he was a Republican that acted more like a I can't even remember. It doesn't even matter. But so I talked to him. So he made a point to come shake my hand and interface with me after the meeting, and I was left feeling positive, and he charmed my pants off, right? Because that's what he does. Well, he's some version of a psychopath, right? The doctor, as we know, is some version of a psychopath. That's who they want as doctors, is psychopaths. And the system is getting as many of those folks into those positions as possible. So the fact that, I may leave the doctor feeling positive, what does that have to do with anything? Right. Um, at the end of the day, I'm interested in effectiveness, around resolving these conditions if they're resolvable. Right. And why would I be concerned with medical coding and billing? Now, if I was in a fear state, right, and if I went by the word of mouth and the common sense and the conventional wisdom, now I'm a tool. Now I'm a series of transactions for the medical establishment. See, if I'm willing to accept the fear, if I'm willing to accept the common sense, which doesn't exist, the word of mouth is, oh my God, the fear around death, right, which practically speaking, I would say is just, again, what I am will never know death. However, a person in such a state, right? And remember, I was coming off of a 2 extended periods of very heavy drinking, months on end, heavy drinking every day. And so that mental state also, you the draining, alcohol, very difficult. It's very rough on the brain chemicals. It drains, it's a brain drain chemically. A poison, of course. So, I see why people get sucked into this, right? The medical system. And then part of this was also that, I knew this was my only shot, because I knew, well, if I go to the doctors when I was initially, when I got off the booze enough to figure out what was going on, well, I have enough knowledge that if I go to the doctor, the first thing they're going to do is put me on dialysis. It's like, yeah, but I know how to get my kidneys working again, and I got my kidneys working again without going on to a machine. Because why do they want to put me on dialysis? Well, they'll say, well, you're in, it's your kidney failure so serious. They'll just say, well, Benton, you're going to die from this if we don't put you on dialysis. That's what they would have told me. Right. And also, when if I know I go to the doctor and they're going to say, we're going to put you on dialysis, and I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not going on dialysis. What's the point of even going? But why is the doctor telling me I'm going to die without dialysis? It's because of medical coding and billing. Everything involved with a doctor is medical coding and billing, period. And so that's almost a version of the spiritual attack I was talking about earlier, which is, as long as I'm copacetic, everything's fine. But then the moment one of my ideas becomes a threat, and that's really what it is, it becomes a threat. Well, now I have to be spiritually attacked by the realm to try to get me back into improper identification, to put me back into curse, right? Or the curse. Oh, so really what it comes down to is antithesis' notion is these people are cursed. These people within this computer simulation, delusory realm, within this experiment, within this series of trials, within the idea that there is there's a new moment. Now it's here, now it's gone. Now it's here, now it's gone. A series of that, that's what's being measured, right? So antithesis is the idea that blessing has no validity, and it's actually the curse that has the validity, right? Because it's one or the other. There's no middle ground spiritually. I am either, what I am is either one with the most super intelligent force of love and creation at the highest levels, or it's not. There's no middle ground. It's not, well, it's kind of is, except on Tuesdays when he goes and gets shit faced and, does whatever he does, for fun. No, that's absolutely not. One is valid and one is invalid. That's what thesis and antithesis means, but then, it's not always clear which one is, and then it's a matter of perspective, right? Antithesis is like, well, from the perspective of antithesis, curse is valid, right? And of course, within a delusion, when the individual has been sacrificed to Moloch, which represents industrial and post-industrial society, right? And then I was taught and trained from day one to strongly identify with the authority and validity and real actual reality and realness of this dead realm, right, of delusion. Then, and almost virtually everyone I'm interfacing with in the physical is, and I'm beginning to suspect, the higher level folks probably understand that it's a curse and that they are actually, again, it's Los Angeles. Every day I see people walking around who are just overt devil worshipers, right? Like overtly, just in their tattoos, in their t-shirts, right? And to live around here, these they're making 150K plus, right? And more on the plus side, just to even be able to live in this area and be walking around every day. And I'm beginning, some of them just have to understand these dynamics. So I don't know how much of the people are actually, they're LARPing as if, as if there's a blessing, right? As if they have access to blessing. Because at a certain point, they're cut off. At a certain point, they're simply just cut off, meaning they're never going to make it back, right? They're never going to make it back in this life. And this is assuming they even have the Nancy Pelosi MS-13 spark of divinity, that little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, right? That little light of theirs, which is, the devil worship and all of that is, to me, it's a commitment to not letting the light shine, right? It's a commitment to darkness, from my perspective. So, what is to be done about all of that? Well, nothing is to be done about it. It's food for thought. It's apropos of something. But in the past, it was easier for me to be a little closer to what is asserted. Sometimes on these panel channels, and you'll hear people. They're like, well, the belief that people are basically inherently good. It's like, absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. The only way that I see is when the person remembers, right? Remembers what they are, if they are in fact possessed of that, or possessing of that Nancy Pelosi MS-13 spark of divinity, if anybody catches that reference. And which is still worthless. It has no value, practically speaking, which that is the curse, to treat the highest value as if it is of no value. That is the curse, is to be born with the highest possible value into a counterfeit realm of death and destruction, and then to be taught and indoctrinated and to never express based on blessing or properly identified, but performing in such a way to be able to take credit for blessings, right? And to refer to love and to talk about blessing, to talk about love, to talk about good vibes, to always come across, sort of meek and mild and not standoffish, not intimidating, right? Well, I mean, wouldn't the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible be intimidating to certain people from a certain perspective, right? Wouldn't a certain strength of character and spirit be off-putting and making waves to some extent? And again, that's what I am, not bent in the personality, although a lot of that is bent in the personality, and some of that built in culturally and via trauma and all of these other things, and being socialized in particular ways, especially around, hyper masculinity performed largely via anger and, Jordan Peterson's, male hierarchy type shit thrown in, which mostly comes down to, especially if anger is permitted, which a lot of that comes down to, when I was back in my day where I grew up, a lot of that was just whoever had the higher testosterone, or ability to beat somebody up, you know. So I was always high enough on that hierarchy to not, get abused and beaten down necessarily. But yeah, it's all fascinating, and I'm losing interest in it, and then just out of needing to do something with my day, listening to content all day, or like I did yesterday. I did some of my chores, I did my laundry, so it altered my normal schedule, and then I considered doing a live stream yesterday, and it was like, well, while I'm doing these few little chores, it's really not it doesn't fit in to my schedule, and there's always tomorrow unless there's not. Um, but I spent some time reading these news articles yesterday, and then just again listening to content. And it's not necessarily that I'm going to have to find something else to do. It's that, and this is part of the reason I made all that content when I was streaming from the hotel, almost 7 days a week, 6+ hours a day for months on end. At a certain point, creatively, I recognize, I'm going to need to actually make as much or more content than I'm taking in. So I've been taking in a great deal of content, and not that it's necessarily detrimental. Some of it is beneficial in a way, but then overall, it's like, well, what do I do? And it's like, well, I have cell service I've already paid for, like 9 to 10 more months of cell service. I've got 90 more days of YouTube Premium. Sadly, what StreamYard costs for a month is I can get 3 months of YouTube Premium for what 1 month of StreamYard costs. Um, and I don't want to call it addicted. Um, so that's not really the correct term, but um, because I'm able to stop doing things, you know. However, um, it's so appealing and engaging for me personally to be able to walk around listening to YouTube. It's you know, absolutely. If you give me the choice between buying a $50 Google Play gift card or buying, you know, whatever StreamYard costs, I think it's like $45. Well, I'm probably going to go for the 3 months of YouTube Premium. I think it comes out to like $47. Um, so I don't know. Maybe we will. I like StreamYard because it's, you know, it doesn't chew up a lot of battery and it doesn't chew up very much of my data. And what I'm doing here is effectively, you know, it is effectively audio only. If I showed my face, probably there'd be more viewers, but you know, who cares? Uh, Even then, I'd probably have to do the vertical streaming, which most people, myself included, don't like. And then, you know, here's another thing: I pay for YouTube Premium, but if somebody does a vertical video, I can't listen to it with the screen off. Background play doesn't work for shorts and vertical streams, right? Uh, and you know, whatever. So not that it's a conundrum necessarily, because it's why am I stuttering and stammering? At some point in the future, you know, am I merely waiting around till where I finally just say fuck it and just walk away from, you know, whatever little bit of possessions in this car and just, you know, take whatever I feel like carrying and just wander off? I mean, I don't know that I'm too far removed from that. But then, you know, I have had a lot of benefit from. It's been helpful for me to be able to speak these things, and yeah, I can just go talk. I can speak these things and not record them and not disseminate and broadcast them. But if I'm going to be doing this anyway, and it is helpful from, it does provide a structure where, you know, I know that I'm performing and it's going to bring the performance up to a certain level versus I might talk to myself out loud in another scenario for 5 minutes and then it's just like, okay, well, now I'm done and move on to the next thing. You know, I've already been talking for over an hour here and I might do another hour. Who knows? Um, although yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I only have a few hours of the StreamYard left. So if I manage it, I think I can get two more streams out of it after this one, maybe three, depending on how long this one goes. So we shall see. The royal we shall see. Shout out to the chat. Appreciate the few, the proud. 6 in the house. Every time I call out the number, usually a couple leave, but that's all right. Um, Something's going on in my intestines here. I think later on today we're going to have some relief, but and I can't at this point I can't tell if the discourse is helping or hurting with the digestion. I think it's probably about a push, although I should be walking around or I could be walking around. I think it's actually, I think my body's telling me to, it's used to already going for walks at this time. Um, yeah, the routine of the undiagnosed fake autistic person, the routine. Yeah, my body's accustomed to already be walking around. But, you know, again, when I talk about, you know, the true knowledge of self and knowing what's going on here, like what's the difference, right? Well, I mean, what's the difference? Um, so more and more, I am finding that the Fight Club idea of to let that which does not matter truly slide, you know, and again, back to the notion of external meaning, right? So at what point is that just more or less everything externally being left to its own devices? Might have temporarily picked up an IRL listener. which is fine. Hopefully they will learn to not let me know that there's an IRL listener because it interrupts the flow of what I'm doing. But maybe they have to get close enough to hear me. I don't know. I definitely heard a foot plant, although I could be wrong, and I'm not interested. I can't see out that far. I'm sure it's fine. Probably just somebody walking their dog, and the dog wants to sniff the tree. Yep. And then the loop into problem solving, right? And I don't know. I think I probably ran off almost all of the loop into problem solving folks. And in fact, there was, one of my most famous examples was a particular user that and I don't read. I haven't been reading the comments, but back when I was, looking at the comments more regularly, I got to where I would see them, here and there, but certain names that don't come back and post in the chat. There's at least one I know was a big loop into problem solver, right? And by that I mean it's almost impossible to talk about any particular phenomenon or phenomena without some people wanting to immediately begin proffering solutions, right? And form some kind of coalition of problem solvers, and which is not logical because, well, the system hasn't come to me and said, hey man, we're tasking you with coming up with solutions, and then you're going to make your presentation, and if everything sounds good, then we're going to give you a team and resources, and then you are going to go begin the process of addressing the problems. Until that happens, what is the purpose of the loop into problem solving? What I would say is that the person who loops into problem solving is getting something out of it at the level of their own self-image, feeling a certain type of way, because I know in the past I was one of those people, immediately wanting to talk about potential solutions. And that's something I've actually transcended and grown and moved beyond. And I've also um, recognized when I begin to do that, and I just choose not to most of the time. Well, although again, show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. That includes me, and I'm sure there's examples of me not doing that quite correctly. So back to these, because I wanted to tell some stories about me walking around as just a serious a white guy with a certain type of bearing, right? And while all these people are in their fear spaces, you know, head on a swivel looking for immigration, la migra everywhere. And just the fact that I'm almost never with other people, it's like, yeah, they're not. Has anybody spotted ICE and it was just one of them, right? I don't know. Is that a thing? I'm pretty sure it's not, right? And then some of it is just dislike of, again, what they believe I represent, which is fine. Just leave me out of it, right? So yesterday I'm walking down the sidewalk and there's two old Hispanic ladies standing at the bus stop on my side of the sidewalk. And then on the other side of the sidewalk are two Hispanic men, older, probably my age, maybe older, hard to tell. And one of them is the typical height, right, of somebody and they're both probably, came here from another country, although maybe a long time ago, who knows. And they're standing on the other side of the street, but it looks like they're waiting on the light to change to cross the street. That's what it looks like. They're both going to cross the street, and it looks like they're together and they're going to go do something together. That's what it visually looks like, right, as I'm walking up. So as soon as and it looks like there's the other guy is like a big guy. It looks like a big Hispanic guy, although as it will turn out, that wasn't the case, but just from across the street. So as soon, and this is what I mean by being spiritually attacked by the realm, and a lot of this being proximity and timing, because he, upon sight of me, immediately begins jaywalking across the street. And this is probably tied to my own, athletic and sports abilities and the way my mind works. I know immediately he's going to perfectly intersect me if we're going to meet at a particular point, if near these Hispanic ladies, right? If I continue on my current pace. And so I don't know his exact motivation. I think it could be that because of this idea that the white people are coming to kick you out of the country, right? And then maybe he knows these old ladies, maybe he wants to curry favor, maybe he wants to be seen as protective over them. But my thing is understanding of the pace I'm walking, understanding of this is bizarre because the other guy is still just standing there at the light, right? And I'm pretty sure they said something to each other when they first saw me. I'm almost certain of it in Spanish. And none of this is me being paranoid. This all really happened. So I just start almost comically, I start doing these little baby steps with my feet. I just immediately almost entirely halt my forward progress. So now he gets to the other side of the road. He lands on the sidewalk, but now I'm too far away from the Hispanic ladies, right? See, he's wanting to all four of us to get there at the same time, right? Now it could be maybe he was genuinely fearful that I was going to do something to these women. I don't think that was the case because now I've screwed up his timing. Now he doesn't know what to do because remember he wasn't going to jaywalk across the street until he saw me, right? So now he's just standing there and he's just kind of like doesn't know what to do and looking around, and he just sort of kind of kills time with his body language until I'm still moving forward but way less quickly than before. I'm sort of just shuffling my feet, and then so now that he sees the timing of when I'm going to pass the two ladies, now he comes towards me and he's standing up straight and tall and like he's going to be protective, right? And it turns out he's basically about my size. It's like, wow, that's interesting. But this odd combination of big and small simultaneously. But I probably weighed a little more than me. But um, I guess the other guy was so tiny, it made this dude look big. But then, and I'm also like looking him in the eyes and I'm thinking to myself, like, hey, I'm not the bad person, number one, but if I was, I'm pretty sure like this dude wouldn't be able to stop me, right? Like if I did have an ill intent. I had no fear of him, certainly. And I just like kind of looked at him like, what the fuck is this? And just kept it moving after that. And see, the old Benton, before even as much as I had evolved my spiritual practice and my self-control, before the unlocking the achievement of true knowledge of self, I would have had something to say about this, right? Like I would have left the situation physically, most likely, especially because of the language barrier and not wanting to bother. Of course, the old ladies are completely, they're nonplussed by the entire thing, if they even noticed at all. And again, I would like to give him just the idea that he probably just wants them to view him as protective. I'm assuming, like he would protect them if it came down to it. Which great, yeah, but why do I have to be involved? And yesterday, at least 3 times, I either rapidly increased my foot pace or just took off running to particularly avoid one of these timing situations. Because multiple times a day, I'm just walking along, and then out of nowhere, somebody pops up, and I immediately know, like, okay, we're going to just perfectly intersect at this point. And so sometimes I'll just speed up enough to interrupt that timing, right? And it's a spiritual attack, and people can say all they want. Oh, well, you think you're this and you're thinking, look, what I am, this place exists in opposition to what I am. So yeah, I do think all of that. Actually, you're right. I know all of that. I know all of that. So absolutely that's what's happening. It's spiritual attack everywhere I go all the time. Right. Which is fine because most of it is so low level. The only ones that have even the potential, the only spiritual attacks that even have the potential to bear fruit for the attackers these days is when I first wake up in the morning, which is hilarious. Yesterday morning, my immediate thought upon awakening was, you're running out of money. First thing that popped into my head. The next thing that popped into my head was, well, if man can't serve two masters and I can serve, the nature of what I am, my own essence, or I can serve money, right? I guess in a way, I won't really know, you know, how close I am to perfecting this path. The closer I get to perfecting this path, mind, body, and spirit, it'll be to wake up, and the first thoughts will be of something that could be referred to as, one of the two masters. I hesitate to use the word God because in that brings in notions of Heavenly Father, and it certainly ain't that. But again, that super intelligent force of love and creation, right? Or just no thoughts at all. But then back to unlocking the true knowledge of self, it's a simple matter, whatever little bit of fear was there through the idea of not having money, right? Again, if I let that idea run wild, that's affirming that I could ever lack anything. See, that's not possible. What I am cannot experience lack except within a delusion, right? And to uh, identify with the authority or validity that it's possible for me to even, number one, experience fear, but number two, experience fear of not having money, right? That's a violation. That's how Dick Gregory used to say. He used to say that's a violation, and I never knew what he meant. And I finally, again, the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, is teaching me all things, like the Bible says. Well, what he meant was that's to curse one's blessing, right? That's to curse the blessing, uh, of what the being is, if the being is what I am. And that can never be assumed or taken for granted. And I'm almost certain at this point, if I'm not the only one, if I'm not the only being, then the reality that's one with this force, then the reality is there are other beings who that's the case for them. And then I'm almost certain there's a large group who just simply either they've always been so cut off from it that it's effectively not there, or it's just never been there at all. And that's probably where we get into these ideas of like intergenerational curses and such. I'm assuming, right? I assume that would be the case. Intergenerational curses and all of that. Wouldn't that be so what would be the purpose of an intergenerational curse? And some might say, well, to punish struggle, strife, loosh farming and all of that. And yes, however, if that's even a thing, and I'm not saying that it is. However, I think it's way more serious than that. I think it's the intergenerational curse is to make it as unlikely as possible that anyone who is able to potentially access that spark of divinity and then, you know, give it enough fuel over time, right? To where the person is able to properly identify the majority of the time. And that's my only job here, folks. This idea that every man hath not the same office from the Bible. Well, that's true in a way, I would say, contextually, but it's not true in all contexts, right? What I mean by that is if when I'm serving love in this realm, when I'm expressing consistent with my nature externally, whatever I perform externally, that is the part that every man hath not the same office. Meaning, when Benton expresses that nature, it's going to be in a different way than when another person expresses it, if that makes sense. But we're only talking externally, right? Internally, within my own sphere of influence, the only thing the only thing of concern is proper identification, because that removes all chance of error, right? And that's the main thing that this realm never wants people to discover. And that's unfortunately one of the major ways that this realm uses Christ, or a concept of Christ. It's through churches and the Christian religion and through other means, to psychologically enslave people to the notion that you can't ever express spiritual perfection because there was a Jesus Christ. He did it and you can't. Right. And it's based on a lie, right, of Saul of Tarsus. If there was a real Saul of Tarsus, Paul from the Bible, who wrote down lies and said, and taught the people. Well, and it probably wasn't a lie. This is how diabolical this is. This is how pernicious this can be. He probably wasn't lying, but it was the idea that he's speaking for the church when he says, he wrote words to the effect supposedly of, no matter how pure his intention is, no matter how you know uh in the spirit he is, right? That still, when he goes out, he still performs wickedness externally, right? And then applying that to Jesus, the church's notion is, well, Jesus was the perfect expression in each new moment of pure spiritual perfection and righteousness, fully expressing the I am for the entirety of his earthly life. And because Benton, it's already too late for Benton to ever match that standard, that means Benton can't ever righteously and perfectly express the nature of what he is in any given new moment. And that's a lie. And that's the idea that there's not a righteous man anywhere. Yes, statically there's not. You're absolutely right. If the standard is in each new moment the man must bring forth righteousness, of course, but it's been misapplied to mean that a man cannot express righteously in any given new moment. And that's simply false. And the reality is, uh, they don't say it overtly, but churches, through implication, absolutely promote false ideas. And that's just a true fact. And it's not debatable. That is an idea that's absolutely, and it's taboo for me to even talk this way. Some people would immediately say blasphemy, and I say, well, that's okay, because apparently the only unforgivable sin is blasphemy in the Holy Spirit. And I'm not. I know this. That is to curse one's own blessing, and that's not what's happening here. So I don't know what to tell you, because if what I'm doing here is actually a sin, guess what? I will detect it. I will confess it. I will repent, I will seek forgiveness, and I will be forgiven. So what's the difference, right? But again, now the Christian church is going to accuse me, right? Accuse me of what? Having the audacity to claim uh, perfect expressions of my own what I am when I'm properly identified, and when properly identified, I can't be in error. Now, I can absolutely be in error from the perspective of this world. I can absolutely be in error from the perspective of the lovers of death, right? And that's what it means to love this realm, is to love death. Everybody who loves this place, right, is having a good time here overall, right? Meaning, they're provided for, they're contented, they think it's great. They're the people who would defend an indefensible system of death, right? Those people love death by definition because they love this place. Anybody who loves this place loves death. There's no two ways about it. So there's really nothing for me as far as Benton, the persona, Benton, this version of Benton, the persona, the performance, right? Except, so there's nothing for me here, meaning to seek. There's nothing to go and grab a hold of outside of me. There's nothing external with meaning at those levels, right? Except, again, I'm able to interface with the people, I'm able to observe, I'm able to deliver discourses, and all of that has its external component. What I mean by no external meaning is that the only meaning that can ever have validity or be authorized by definition can only exist within my energy sphere, because that's the only place Benton has access to legitimate authority, because all authority that is not the authority of what I am one with, which is the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, in fact, does not represent authority at all. Right. So I understand that the royal we are playing a game where when I'm physically out and about, there is the police and the state and the government and the corporations, and there's all of these mechanisms that I am, correcting my, not I am, that's almost a curse of the blessing, right? That's almost a curse of the blessing. So I have to scratch out and say, actually, no, I have to use Benton, right? I can't even say it. I can't even use the I am there, or that would be a violation, you know? So whatever I was trying to say, just replace Benton with replace the I am with Benton. And also part of Benton's personality is to want to explain all of this to people, right? And that's based on I could have this explained to me, right? And I would find it, if I was uninitiated to these ideas, I would find it interesting and I would want to hear the explanation and I would not be threatened by the explanation. The reality is the vast majority of everybody externally in this realm, they don't want to hear it. And for me to attempt to explain it to them is not going to, I'm not going to have a good time and they're not going to have a good time. It's probably going to become contentious at some point. Well, guess what? What I am cannot create, it's unable to create resistance or contention or strife or struggle. And so the moment I'm experiencing strife or struggle or friction, see, I already know that I'm improperly identified. And so that's the mechanism that keeps me like, so in the scenario on the sidewalk yesterday with the bizarre behavior, um, and that the old Benton maybe would have had some, neutered version of an autistic freakout right on the tail end of that. Well, the changes to my internal state as I walked away, I recognized that my first few reactions were based on improper identification. So I went back to proper identification, which then precludes me from creating resistance. I can't, when properly identified, I'm not able to make a struggle. I'm not able to make resistance or contention, right? And so that's fascinating. And again, spiritual attack versus let's see, it's almost like the antithesis is like, hey, let's see how he handles this one, right? Let's see. And again, back to the computer simulation aspects, you know, and the computer simulation would presumably be interested in once it detects that there's this being Benton who's seemingly now operating in a different way based on this true knowledge of self, sort of now experiment on the performance, use the performance as an experiment to gain more information. And when we talk about AI and algorithms, I mean, of course, that would be what would happen, right? Well, of course it would. If it's machine learning, and I talk about Moloch's machine and all of these things, and if there really is louche farming and notions of, negative entities and all of this being fueled by, but not, having the ability to create energetically, they're not able to create anything to feed on. They need positive beings, right? And I'm temporarily adopting some of the vernacular of a different YouTuber or content creator, but temporarily. Then the antithesis or the negative beings, right, to feed on negativity, that negativity has to be created via my creative force, just like the realm itself is created and propagated. The delusion continues to propagate based on the creative force, right? And so that's why solipsism can't ever be completely off the table, because of what I am. Just me being here would be enough. That would be access to enough creative force to keep this whole thing going. Because what I am is one with a limitless being. It's limitless, right? It will never experience a lack of anything. Okay. At this point, what's the difference? I'll never know, at least not while I'm here. I'll never know if it's solipsism or not. I mean, what's the difference? But, and I suspect the fact that, it's just, I'm considered a rube if I'm even willing to introduce solipsism into a conversation, right? Oh, well, we thought he was saying some smart shit, but he doesn't even know that solipsism is considered invalid. It's like, no, I absolutely know it's invalid, considered invalid, and I'm saying it anyway. What now? But, that's just, they're done with it. At that point, that's their signal to no longer listen to a word I have to say, which is fine, because what's the difference? Is that my purpose? Now, if again, if this most super intelligent force of love and creation, if that's how it chooses, right? That's how, if that's the path to of expression, me publicly speaking, that's fine. But I don't know in the long run that that's going to be it. Benton doesn't know if that's going to be the thing or not. But ultimately, what is there to actually when the individual has removed himself and his own wants and desires have largely been removed from the equation, not entirely, but largely. Well, what now? And that's more of the problem. And I don't even want to say problem. That's more of the what remains unsolved is okay, where to go and what to do. And I understand the loop into problem solving. People will have many. I'm not asking for suggestions. That's a rhetorical question. Where to go rhetorically. Let me check real quick. I want to see how much StreamYard time I have left. Let's see. Billing. I have enough money, and people, I'm pretty sure over the last few months, there have been enough donations to pay for the StreamYard. And I have enough money. So as I run, and I'm going to run out of money either way. So I might just go ahead and pay for a month of it, but I haven't decided yet. I guess I won't know until StreamYard won't let me go live. And if I'm unwilling to do it on my, just, through my phone directly through the YouTube client, which I probably will be. See, I don't think it'll tell me it won't tell me how much I have left. So I had 16, let's see, I was at 1632 out of 20 when I started this. And now we're at 1732 plus. So now we're at about 18. So yeah, I can only get two more. So it doesn't even matter. At this point, it doesn't matter if I stop early or not to try to save time. Let's check the battery. Let's check the battery levels. Let's see. Oh yeah, we're doing good. Shout out to the chat. And then, I haven't even talked about the team sport elements of this experience where, I understand that a lot of the listeners, and a lot of, there's not that many people who are going to hear this, but of those few folks, some number of those people will, be desirous of some sort of, community in the real world, or some sort of collection of individuals, sort of a support group, for people who have this level of understanding, or at least enough level of understanding to follow along and to be attracted to what I'm talking about on here. You know, which is much like an earlier version of Benton. So in some ways, I'm probably just a little farther ahead on the progression than other folks are probably on that same progression, I would have to guess. But, eventually the rubber meets the road, and folks, are going to want to be led. I mean, that's just, most people are followers. That's just a fact, right? Mathematically, right? I am not going to be leading anyone. Benton's leading Benton, right? And Benton, what Benton has led himself to is to be led by his own nature as much as possible, because that's the infallible. What I am is infallible. What I am is infallible, right? Not Benton, not the performer, not the performance within delusion. The essence, the thing itself, the real thing. It is the real thing, the actual real thing. It doesn't make mistakes. Love don't make mistakes, folks. Love is perfect all the time, right? The problem is there's a whole bunch of things that fall short of that standard that get called love, and they're not. And I'm beginning to realize the more, especially with this true knowledge of self, but the more time every day I spend in my internal space, properly identified with what I know myself to be, the more I realize there's effectively no love in this place, other than, accepting what I am, which is within me, right? The kingdom of God is love, and the kingdom of God or love is within me. So outside of my sphere of influence, uh, I'm not saying it doesn't exist at all. I'm saying it's rare. Actual love expressed. And again, it expresses creatively, which is why I don't need to concern myself with how is the future going to manifest? How's it going to look? What am I going to be doing? How is that going to look? Right? Because to me, that's everything about Christians and joining churches or all of these things. It's, the Christian do-gooder first imagines what it will be like to go embark upon Christian do-gooding. That has to look a certain type of way. It has to be performed a certain type of way, right? It has to be done in a certain context. So it's like, yeah, I know there's a food bank today I might go check out, except I'm would only probably want to have a few items. Well, I know the way these places operate, you take everything, they give everybody the same stuff usually, and you either take it all or you don't take any of it, right? There's no just, but love would be to say, oh, Benton is here because he suspects that we have these canned apricots, and for some reason nobody sells them in the stores around here, and he's just here for the canned apricots, right? And he doesn't want to have to take all this other stuff, but maybe I should, and then just go give it to other people. And I mean, but the point I'm making is, they're already believing they're doing something loving. Now they're doing something helpful. They're serving the people. However, they're doing it in a way in which the love is removed. Even if the love was there initially, right? The love gets removed. And again, I've talked about on recent streams that the way this place operates, a lot of it operates through the carrot and the stick at the level of withholding. So in fact, the love, even if it's potentially present, it's actually withheld until the person performs sufficient enough to prove themselves worthy. And that can't ever be love, right? That can't ever be love. Love doesn't do that. Um, Now, doing, when you catch me also not doing that, yeah, that's because as a human, I'm a hypocrite, at least at this time. And a person observing the performance will see that I don't always meet that standard. And my contention is that within the computer simulation aspects, that somebody somewhere could pull up a chart or a graph and say, well, we can see here that, yeah, he's not perfectly expressing this, but we see that there's a trend over time where he's bringing this forth to some extent, whereas in the past he was bringing it forth to almost no extent, you know. And what Benton is interested in is increasing that frequency, right? Benton has no interest in the part where other people can point the finger and ridicule and mock and try to say, well, look, he's talking about all these ideas, but look at what he's doing, right? I don't, again, truth doesn't have to be validated by ignorance, right? Life is not validated by death, right? Uh, life, that is authority. Life is the authority, right? The highest form of life, the highest form of vibration, that's authority. Everything below that highest level, if it could even properly be said to represent authority, is a lesser authority. So I have access to highest possible authority. God is love, and the kingdom of God slash love is within me. That's called highest authority. So, to the extent in which I am able to properly identify with what I know myself to be, what I am represents ultimate authority, but not bent in the personality, not bent in the psychology. And this is where I think a lot of folks, even if they come to you know, that they come to all of this inside of themselves, it's, for me, it's the ability to discipline my thinking to know the difference between, my psychology, my personality, and my performance, and my identity vis-a-vis Benton and my characteristics, and to understand that's all completely separate from what is meant when I say what I am, which is super intelligent force of love and creation. What would be the personality of that force, right? An indivisible force that can only seemingly be individuated within a delusion, which is this place. Only via death, right? Only via a realm of death and destruction that exists, unreal, right? Surrealistically, waking dream, unreal. Only via that can this even be, potentially even expressed, and it might just be, or experienced rather, not expressed, experienced, and it might just be my imagination. Because anxiety's dead, folks. And so, and people can say, well, that's fine, except, the people are still anxious. The people still speak openly of their anxiety. Yeah, they're speaking openly of death. Anxiety is by nature dead, right? It contains no life, other than what the being, seemingly gives it. Although that, I would say, that's not life. That's animation, right? So again, if the being is one with what I am, then that's the anxiety is the process whereby the creative force is, for that time period, is animating what is probably an imagined state of anxiety. Because if I'm the real thing, and the real thing is life itself, or living manifestation via creation, right? And then we talk about concepts of death, but then what I am can't even conceptualize death. What I am can't conceptualize anxiety or fear, or all of these things. So the very experience of these things, would that not have to occur via imagination of creation? So these are actually imagined things that are always dead and never have life, but much like a claymation or an animated film could seemingly have life, right? Or a robot, you know, that makes more sense to me. Um, so the anxiety, the rare moments I experience fear or anxiety, which it still happens, but it's rare. That's because improper identification has subverted my creative force Benton's creative force that never lies dormant. And it's temporarily, that creative force is animating via imagination, most likely. I'm not certain of this yet, but most likely via imagination, creative force is temporarily animating those states of anxiety, fear, depression, guilt, shame, and on. Anger, hatred, right? Strictly speaking, they don't exist. But strictly speaking, nothing exists except the, again, what I am. That's thesis. Thesis is the only thing that exists at the level of validity and authority in actual realness vis-a-vis the real thing is super intelligent love and creation as a force, and a power at the highest levels of vibrational frequency. And it can always vibrate ever faster to avoid the attacks of antithesis, right? So, what's there to do? It's like, yeah, I'm about to walk to the grocery store in a few minutes and buy the eggs. But I mean, does that even matter, right? Like, what's the difference? Um, my intestines are letting me know, hey, we're not in distress. We're just giving you signals that we would appreciate it if you would go for a walk, please. Because probably something's going to happen, something beneficial is going to happen later on today. And it's like, yeah, well, okay, that's great, but it's probably still going to happen even if I don't go for a walk right now. What's the difference? Whereas, pre true knowledge of self, Benton, having a motor and wanting to get shit done would have already been, probably we would be ending the stream right about now, because would see, okay, well, I can still go to the grocery store before they're busy, because I just dislike going in there when there's a bunch of people. But if this is important, then I can do this, and then later on, if the store's busy, who cares? I'll just put my big boy pants on and deal with it, right? I mean, that's the way that goes. Hmm. So yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at in life. If anybody's curious, if anybody ever pops in for a Benton update, something I find interesting is I don't really look at the statistics for the channel much anymore. But every once in a while, I'll go into the YouTube Studio app, which I don't even like using that because you get way more information on the desktop version. But at one point, the audience for this channel and these live streams was 40% female. And at a certain point, it was looking like I might be able to get it to 50-50. And of course, that was back during the daily live streams, sometimes multiple live streams, and, for hours on end from the hotel. And now, the last time I checked, it's 97% male. I said, man, it's funny. And I won't entirely blame because it's not the Jesus talk, because there was still a higher proportion of ladies stuck around for the Jesus talk when it was a little more biblically based, right? And the more it's gotten into ideas I'm bringing forth based on being taught by the Comforter, which is biblical. It's biblical to be. The Bible says it's going to send the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, and that's going to teach you, right? So that's happening, and it also talks about and bring all things unto your remembrance, which I take to mean the remembering of what I am. Being born into this realm spiritually perfected. Well, if I was born into this realm spiritually perfected, can the spiritually perfected become spiritually unperfected? Now, it can certainly apparently perform as if it's nowhere near spiritually perfected. That's possible, apparently, because uh, I've done it quite a bit and it continue to in a more limited fashion, at least at times, before I correct myself and turn away from iniquity, right? So just like I'm not able to err when properly identified, am I able to truly perform correctly when improperly identified? Because this world of lies and this realm will tell me sweet little lies that it's possible, while identified with potential authority and validity of this realm, that it's possible for me to be externally identified and to also serve the so-called greater good, or to bring forth things that are good or loving. And I'm here to say no, it's not, because for a time that can express, but there's no potential for perfect expression, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. So yeah, there can be a LARP of a person. Many people can be improperly identified and still seemingly behave correctly, right? Especially if there's something in it for them, but there's still always the potential for error. When properly identified, there is no potential for error. Now, what can happen is the person can be attacked and ridiculed, and it can be insinuated that, well, actually, sir, that wasn't correct. And I'm here to say, well, who's the judge of that? Who or what is the authority? Who or what has the authority to make those determinations? Right? Because what I would say is that what I am is the authority that makes those determinations. That's what I would say. So, the fact that lovers of death may critique the performance and reach a different conclusion, what I would say, well, they're not the judge, meaning they're not the one with the ability to pass sentence. They lack the ability to pass sentence upon what I am. But it does not. But so it's a consensus when we talk about cursing, blessing, and we talk about antithesis, seeking the moment to pause the game to then appeal via legalese to say, well, it turns out that you know antithesis is actually the highest source, right? uh, in order to do that, it is attempting to do that via consensus by trying to appeal via legalese and say, well, none of these beings are bringing forth what was purported to be their true essence. Therefore, at a consensus level, it turns out that what was believed to represent blessing is actually manifesting to represent curse at a level of consensus, right? So the fact that there can be a consensus externally is representative of nothing other than death, right? External consensus can't ever represent life, except and this is not a consensus, but the caveat of when two or more are gathered in my name, meaning in my spirit, right? In the spirit, meaning properly identified, right? And I have been in those situations a few times, and it's rare, but it does happen. And there is sort of an exponential, both people are feeling very energized and positive. And, there does seem to be, where that could potentially, at least temporarily, behave as, what people might think they mean when they say body of Christ, right? Um, is also not a thing, at least not in the way that the church teaches. Simply not a thing, folks. If it was, that how could America be what it is, right? Like that doesn't even. Now again, that's not how logic works. I'm asking a rhetorical question. uh that's not how logic works, but just it's something to think. It's food for thought at the level of food for thought. Yep. And then look at how people are set up to seek consensus, because it feels good. It feels more secure when people agree more than they disagree, right? So in a realm of death, and surrounded by lovers of death, well, then that positive feeling of acceptance and doing what's right in the eyes of death and antithesis and lovers of death and devil worshippers, that can never represent victory, right? That can't ever be the correct course. But it can be the course that this realm of death rewards. So I can see why many people could be confused. And then, where does it say in the Bible that the follower of Christ is somehow entitled to not uh, uh, to not behave courageously? Because it takes courage to uh, to be attracted to and to desire the seeming security of the idea of strength in numbers, which is not a thing, but the idea of being accepted by, again, within a delusory, a counterfeit realm of death, and to say, well, the individual is like, hey, well, I can't, if they can't tolerate how it feels to actually follow the teachings of Christ from the Bible, if they can't even follow it enough to get to going within themselves deep enough to find the courage that has to exist there if they are what I am, because what I am can never lack anything, of course, including courage, right? So it doesn't even come down to cowardice versus courage. It comes down to, until the person uh, has that baptism in the Holy Spirit, until the person uh, resurrects the living Christ within them. Okay. Uh, and the worship is then within them. The worship is within their energy sphere, right? And then some would say, "Oh, I'm not talking about worshiping Benton the psychology, Benton the characteristics, Benton the performer, Benton the performance. I'm talking about the energy sphere. I'm talking about the spiritual war. I'm talking about mind, body, and spirit. I'm talking about bringing Christ in to that energy sphere." And so when people say, and I took a picture the other day of some graffiti, and somebody on one of those little stickers wrote, "Jesus is," and drew a crown, right? Well, Jesus, number one, is not king. Number two, king of what? So you got people running around here saying Christ is king and can't answer my question when I say king of what, right? But if I'm going to come on here and say the Lord is my shepherd, I better damn well know what I mean. Or Benton better damn well know what that means if he's going to be speaking that way. So I need to be able to answer the question when someone says to me, well, okay, what does that mean? So you got people running around here claiming to be Orthodox bros and all this, and I'm almost certain, I could just wait, and I see it in like the Sam Hyde comments. It's like Christ is king, and it gets all the upvotes, and I'm taking a posting of what? King of what? Hopefully you don't mean this realm of death and destruction. I hope you don't mean he's king of that. So when I talk about Christ as Lord, that's to be filled with, to be fully filled with what I already am, right? Because what I am is one with what Jesus is. And that's what Christianity is supposed to be. And probably it could be some sort of process whereby the individuals are taught that from a young age and then are facilitated in, you know, the parable of the sower and the reaper to, prepare the ground, right? To prepare each, instead of sacrificing them to antithesis or Moloch, to till the soil as the person grows up so that they will have their baptism in the Holy Spirit, so that they will um, invite Christ to be king or lord of their internal space. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So when properly identified within myself based on this true knowledge of self, that's what it is. It's not I am that thing. It's not I am a set of characteristics, a personality, and a performance that equals Jesus. It's never that. It's Christ ruling with ultimate authority my internal space, ruling it perfectly and unerringly with ultimate unsupersedable authority. And sin is when Benton, the performer, uh, incorrectly identifies with the validity of anything other than what I am, which is the exact same thing that Jesus is one with. It's the same thing because it can't be divided. And Jesus himself said it through implication. Jesus himself said it in the Bible. Again, we're free to accept or reject these ideas. I'm not pushing the Bible. I'm speaking in the context of the Christian's book. Jesus talked about when he was casting out demons and the Pharisees tried to negate his and not even as an accomplishment, but Pharisees from their perspective want to negate that. And they say, oh, well, he could be casting out demons, but in the name of Beelzebub, right? Some version of Satan. And then Christ's response was, well, if hate can drive out hate, then Satan's kingdom is divided against itself and therefore cannot stand, right? And that's an inverse. What Jesus is actually saying is that I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. And what I am, that force, the highest form of love and creation, the highest forms of authority and validity, if it can be divided, it can't ever be the highest form of authority. Because again, what do they say? Divide and conquer, right? This is the place of divide and conquer. This is the realm of, oh, in an imagination, in a waking dream, in a delusion, let's pretend like it's possible to break off a little chunk of this indivisible force. And then let's just sort of have a computer simulation and let's see how this thing plays out. That's what this place is, right? It's actually seeing what happens based on the authority and validity of death, right? The government represents death because it's of this realm. The politicians represent um, death. They are of this realm. But those psychopaths, if you ever shake their hand and look into their eyes and have a conversation with them, I can tell you from my experience meeting Mike Ross, I believe was his name many years ago in Arkansas, I was aware that he charmed my fucking pants off when I left there. And it didn't change my mind or my opinion, but to beings who are more set up to respond emotionally, of course it works. Of course it does. So the feelings in and of themselves, that's neither here nor there. It all has to align mind, body, and spirit. All the systems within Benton's energy sphere. Now, Benton, uh, perf- is Benton able to perform within, death and delusion and destruction? And yeah, let the larger force uh, take over and run the show, right? It's the most capable, you know? So that's what that means. So you got people who think that they believe a religion and think they practice a religion and can't tell you what if they themselves say Christ is king, don't know what that's supposed to mean. So again, I'll go back to it. What do I need of the church? The church needs me. Now that's a thought experiment. It doesn't need me. What I mean is if it wants to be what it claims to be, it needs people who understand at the level I understand, right? And my abilities to grasp and work with the concepts, even of the Bible, is just so far beyond any of these people I meet. And as I go, into no money and all of these things, it won't be too long until I'm more and more often subjected to these types of people I'm speaking about, because I did. Uh, Even though I had money, I wandered over to check out the homeless meal, and it's. I mean, for what it was quite good. And then it's like, oh, you can't complain and you can't do this. It's like, look, I can do anything, but it's not about complaining. It's about if they're here to serve me food, and that's the purpose of this thing. Why do I need to be a lowly, wretched, irredeemable, sinning creature to come in there and eat some food? Like, but what if I'm at a certain level of spiritual growth, and I understand that if I just want to ask the question, hey, I've only been here one other time, is it possible to find out what they're serving before I get here? Which is a simple question, right? And this is one of the struggles of the undiagnosed fake autistic person. I'm just asking for information. I'm not trying to like surreptitiously introduce the notion of discussing the quality of the food. If I want to know the quality of the food, I'm going to say, hey, is this food any good? Right. I'm not going to, but probably I'm just going to see for myself. But so when I ask that question, pretty quickly it gets construed into, so now the person I'm asking has to tell me how great the food is, whether it is or not, you know, because, and the first thing I have to say is, well, no, I'm not picky. I'm not asking because I'm a picky eater. I'm asking because of health issues. And it's really pointless for me to walk down here, and it's pointless for me to bring myself here only to see, oh, I can't eat that and then to leave. Right. And it turns out there's just no way to know the menu ahead of time, which is fine. I accept that. And then other people will also want to manage my emotions. That's another thing as an undiagnosed fake autistic person. When I'm asking for information, I have no need of, and this is I can see I'm getting annoyed by this. So hang on. Back to proper identification. So I'm not this way anymore. In the past, see, now I'm animating things that are dead. Show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. That includes me. Um, it's this idea that um, beggars can't be choosers, right? And I'm pretty sure that's not the case, right? I think what that means is if one wants to have freer choices, they're going to have to lift themselves out of the position of a beggar, which of course that makes total sense. But if my choice is to not eat a meal or to show up there for a meal, but to realize that because of my health issues, I might not be able to eat the meal. That's not beggars being choosers. Meaning, to beggars be choosers would to show up and say, "Hey, man, I can't eat this food. Would you make me something different?" That's a beggar being a chooser. Me showing up and asking a question about, "Hey, is it possible to know ahead of time if I can eat this food or not?" That's not me trying to get my way, and that's not me trying to uh, offer up an indictment of the quality of the food and thereby impugning, the reputation of the people who are serving the food, right? But see how quickly the realm attacks me just by attempting to find out information. And meanwhile, I scoured their website first. It's not like I didn't attempt to get the information on my own. And, I hesitate to even ask, right? It's like, can we just skip and then thankfully, this person did not feel the need to tend to my emotions. But, how many times have I asked a question of somebody and all I want is the answer? And I finally get the answer. And now it's all this, the person is doing their whole thing around managing of emotions that I'm not even experiencing. It's like, but then that's the person who thinks they're an empath. It's like, well, I'm not feeling those feelings. So how can the person who claims to be an empath, they think they're feeling what I'm feeling? It's like, well, I'm not feeling any of that, other than I'm annoyed that somebody's trying to thinks it's appropriate to manage my emotions and sort of, help me step down off of this great disappointment of learning that I can't, whatever it is I'm seeking to do at this business or at this place is just not going to happen. It's like, yeah, it's called maturity. I'll just fucking deal with it, right? I'll just put my big boy pants on and deal with it. It's fine. But yeah, I feel the irritation again. So, and it's a fine line because again, some of this is the healing, right? Some of what I'm feeling, it is the healing. It's the stagnated stuff is leaving. And what I've talked about before is, the easiest to evict, loosh, stagnated loosh, if that's the proper term, within my energy sphere, the easier to clear stuff's been long gone. So now we're down to the harder stuff to clear. So it's probably appropriate that temporarily, I'm feeling some type of way, and now I can go back to being calm, cool, and collected, and then hopefully those energies can continue to leave. Right now that the expression has been indulged, but and it's just been an amazing. It has been miraculous. I will say that just the level of healing in my shoulder alone, and not even talking about the chronic illnesses, just the healing in the tissues in the last, well, since the chronic illness, I would say. But some of that had been healed before, but this is to show just how serious the stagnation of the negative states, the negative energies had been in my energy sphere. And it continues to heal. And that's Christ. That's when Christ is king of one's internal space or internal energy sphere, there's healing, right? When Christ enters, when Christ is resurrected within the energy sphere, right? Oh, blasphemy. Well, it's working for me, folks. The proof is in the pudding, right? All this healing. You think these devil worshippers are out here getting healed, right? But I get accused of blasphemy. They don't get accused of blasphemy, right? What Hey, what would a devil worshiper ever have to do in this realm of death and destruction to get accused of blasphemy? But they'll accuse me of it quick, fast, in a hurry, won't they? What a mess. And I'm comfortable and secure in the knowledge that none of this is externally resolvable by yours truly. None of it. Now, if people really wanted to, if people were able to, if enough individuals actually, uh, you know, but then again, am I going to take somebody's word for it with the true knowledge of self and all of this? And, it has to be able to be shown ultimately. But, it would be interesting to, were there ever a possibility to actually raise people right? And that's the thing is, especially in the so-called truth community, I think with the MAGA and the right leaning and, a lot of people being from, smaller areas in the middle part of the country. And it's this idea of, well, making new children, making new people and then teaching them right. But why assume that to be possible? What I would say is if the being is not one with the most super intelligent force of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, and if they don't know that at the level of true knowledge of self, and if they're not, if Christ is not king of their internal space, they don't have the capability to raise people right. So now we are back to the Apostle Paul talking about no matter how pure the intention is, he still performed wickedly. Yeah, of course he did, because unlike what he claimed, Christ was not king of his internal space or his internal energy, his energy sphere, right? He wasn't what he said he was, the Apostle Paul from the Bible. So, consequently, these people who love death, they strongly identify with this realm. The ones who, it can't ever possibly be a hell realm. It can't ever possibly manifest as a hell realm. And then the notion of raising their kids right, they don't have the ability. They have the ability to raise their kids less dysfunctionally than their parents raised them. That's the facts. Because the fact is, these people are still sacrificing their children to Moloch. They're still raising them up to turn them over as adults to this system of industrial revolution and post-industrial revolution, to serve a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, and to thus for them to self-identify and to self-define in relation to a realm of death. So it's, again, the idea of antithesis, uh, convincing um, what could potentially be, again, solipsism. I don't know for sure, but if these people do have Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity, it's the realm convincing these people to um, to do all of these things. And because they're doing it less dysfunctionally and less harmfully than their parents did it to them, that doesn't validate it. That doesn't make it okay. That makes it less abusive, right? That makes it less abusive. But if at the end of the day, the child is still indoctrinated and raised up so that when they're adults, they're going to freely choose to go into Moloch's machine, and they're going to freely choose to identify. And what that's going to represent is they're going to curse their potential blessing. Do you think antithesis gives a flying fuck that the being in the future who was raised by some so-called truthers who wasn't abused as much, right? Who wasn't abused as much, such that it doesn't seem abusive at all? But do you think antithesis gives a flying fuck, as long as at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, that the individual does not let their little light shine and serves antithesis and doesn't serve what I am, which is the highest source and probably the only source of authority and validity whatsoever? Why would antithesis care? All it's trying to do is get to a consensus so it can pause the game and like the movie, and then have a courtroom scene from the movie Devil's Advocate, right? But again, that's an analogy. Now, I don't mean that literally. That's what's happening here, folks. So what good is that? So I'm talking about, well, it doesn't excite me. That's probably why I've never had any notion of having children. I've never even really thought twice. I've hardly ever thought twice about it. Haven't given it much thought at all in my 50 years. And, I would be potentially excited were it possible, to actually raise children properly. And let's be clear, to raise them properly would be to raise them such that they would have the greatest possible opportunity to know exactly what they are, assuming what they are is the same as what I am, and to understand that the error of defining themselves in relation to this world, which would be to curse their own blessing. But love would never restrict them from doing that. And surprise, surprise, that's what the Amish, and I know I'm not saying that they're perfect because they're not, but the Amish who have Rumspringa, see, that's love. Love teaches and then says, all right, well, it's a big bad world, go have at it. Because it's there no matter what we do to you. And if we try to restrict you from it and we try to tell you how bad it is and stay away from it, well, just like when in my world, when my sister or whoever, if she meets some bad boy and my dad's like, I don't want you talking to that guy, what's the worst possible thing he could say if he actually doesn't want her talking to him? Because now that's all she's going to be able to think about is this forbidden bad boy, right? It's the same thing with Rumspringa and all of this. It's like the attractions and the potential to go out here and enjoy oneself, as I enjoyed myself as a young person, as many, if not most of you, enjoy yourselves as young people. What this world has to offer, these this realm of death, the amusements and sense enjoyment, and all of these things, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the whole thing, and let's have a good old time. Um, and yeah, I had my own versions of that, certainly, and most of you probably did as well. But it's to properly teach the child, and I'm not saying the Amish do that either, but and then to say, but see, the right wing and the MAGA types and the judgmental Christians, who I have a lot of experience with. I grew up in all of that, and I don't, look, the fact that my parents took me to the Kingdom Hall, that's fine. I'm talking about I was still around people who were, almost everybody was church going back then where I grew up. And so the church will attempt to restrict, right? That never works. The prohibition doesn't work. You can't tell young people don't go do these things. And in fact, the human mind cannot experience negation anyway. In fact, they're telling them to go do these things. And antithesis is well pleased. Antithesis is like, hey, look at these Southern bozos in the 1980s telling Benton, well, you better not do this and you better not do that. Well, all my brain hears is to do it. Because I can't act on a negative. The brain can't process something it's unable to act upon. It can't, when a person says do not do, the only thing the brain hears a statement without the not. All the brain hears is to do the thing. So like when you say to a child, don't run, the child's brain hears run. It doesn't hear don't. It doesn't know what, it can't process don't. You can't act on a negation, right? You can't take an action based on a negation. Now, what would be correct would be to tell the child walk, because that's something that can be acted upon. So what these Christians would do, and these people where I'm from, they would say, well, don't do this and don't do that. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't fornicate, all the things the Bible says not to do. Well, that just makes people want to do it more. What I'm saying is it would be proper to raise them up and teach them properly, and then make them, and then understand, hey, now you have to go out here and experience this, right? Whether you want to or not. And then, hopefully we've taught you well enough that, it doesn't drag you down into death and destruction. That to me would be proper child rearing, right? That would be somebody taking ownership of their duty. But if they don't even rise to that level within themselves, how can they do that for another person? See? So until individuals invite in and allow Christ in and to rule over their space, right? By a spiritual surrender to what I already am in the first place. What I am is what Christ is, or was, or is, I guess is, would be correct, but not a person from the Bible. See, that's where humans get confused. Is humans have a lot of trouble distinguishing between these various spiritual forces, and then, Jesus as I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, the real thing, right? And they have a lot of difficulty in separating that from what they would imagine Jesus would have looked like, how he would have talked, how he would have been received, how he would have been treated, right? The performer, the performance, right? I'm not talking about that. That's not what I'm talking about. See, so it's not to then say, well, until everybody's out here with the characteristics, right? Until everybody's out here aping the behavior that they believe Jesus would have had, right? No, it's not that. It's being connected with the real thing, which is all there is, all there can be is the real thing, and to move forward courageously based on that. What anybody has to say about it is too fucking bad, right? And even if persecution comes, especially if persecution comes, to continue to do those things. And I understand the system to some extent. It allows the Amish to exist, but it probably doesn't have a choice at the level of legalese. When you look at the interplay between thesis and antithesis, probably the realm has no choice but to allow the Amish to live in the way they live. But then, as we see, what is the realm of death and destruction over time is very slowly but surely, you know, introducing more and more of the technology of the modern world. And I know some Amish sects are more rejecting of the technology, and some of them are like, okay, but only the leaders of the church get to use it, and it's for the benefit of the people. And I understand it's on a spectrum, but ultimately, I would assume that antithesis would say, okay, I have to I can't do anything about these Amish people, right? And that's probably some notion of the Book of Job, and it's like, yeah, have at them, but you can't physically really do anything to them. So antithesis would always, I'm assuming, bide its time and just slowly undermine morally, to where eventually, once that moral fabric, that moral adhesion, the glue that holds them all together, when that gets weakened to a certain extent, then eventually it won't even be what we think of when we imagine the Amish. It'll still look, it'll still be doing a performance, right, based on performing as an Amish person, but they won't actually be living it, right? Much like, and there's a lot of groups that way. I'd say pretty much all groups are like that at this point. That's what religion brings people to. It may be later rather than sooner, but that does seem to be where it ends up. But anyway, I'm out. Thanks for watching. Bye.